Hi, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joyofbaking.com. Today we're going to make red velvet cake pops, and this is what they look like. As you can see inside, it's red velvet cake mixed with some cream cheese frosting, and then we're going to dip them in a white chocolate candy coating, and then you can put some red sprinkles on top. They are just too cute. So the first thing we're going to do is to make our red velvet cake. So preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 180 degrees Celsius. And then we're just going to make one single layer of a red velvet cake. So you will need one 9-inch round cake pan with 2-inch sides. So that's 23 centimeters by 5 centimeters. And then I'm just going to butter my pan. You could spray it with one of those nonstick sprays. And what I do is I just like to melt just a little bit of butter and then use a pastry brush to brush the pan. Now this recipe is going to make us 25 cake pops. So if that isn't enough, you could double this recipe for your red velvet cake and you will get 50. If you're having a party or something. And then I'm going to take a round of parchment paper and just put that in there because that'll make it a little easier to get it out of the pan. Make sure it doesn't stick. So there, that's our pan. So now, if you have an electric stand mixer like I have here, use your paddle attachment, or you could use a hand mixer. The first thing you will need is 4 tablespoons, which is 55 grams of butter. I'm using unsalted butter. Unsalted butter because I prefer the flavor, but you could use salted, and have your butter at room temperature. So I'm just going to beat that just until it gets nice and smooth, just a few seconds. Okay, and then you will need 3/4 of a cup, which is 150 grams of granulated white sugar. Put that in there, and along with a 1/2 teaspoon 2 grams of pure vanilla extract. And now I'm going to beat this on medium-high speed, a couple minutes. I want to get the mix together and then get some air in our batter. Okay, that looks good. So now what we're going to do is add 1 large egg and have that at room temperature. And 1 large egg weighs, without the shell, about 55 grams if you want to go by weight. And then I'm just going to beat that in. Okay, that looks good. Quick scrape. Make sure you get the bottom of your bowl. Tends to stick at the bottom. So now, for our dry ingredients, you will need 1 1/4 cups, 125 grams of sifted cake flour. That means you sift the flour, and then if you're using the cup measurement, then you measure it out. Cake flour is a low gluten flour. It's going to give our red velvet cake that really nice, soft and tender crumb. So I'm just going to put that. I'm going to sift this again. I'm just using a strainer. If you have the sifter, you could use that. And with 1 tablespoon, that's 10 grams of an unsweetened cocoa powder. You can use the natural unsweetened or the Dutch process, whatever you have in the house. And that's just going to give like a really mild chocolate flavor to our cake. Then I'm just going to add 1/4 teaspoon, 1 gram of baking powder, and 1/4 teaspoon, 1 gram of salt. And I'm just going to sift that, get rid of all the lumps either in the flour or the cocoa powder, and plus it mixes everything together. Try to get it in the bowl and not on the counter like I am. And then, so I'm just going to give that a quick whisk. And then you will also need a 1/2 cup, 120 milliliters of buttermilk, and have your buttermilk at room temperature. Buttermilk, you can buy it, like commercially made. You can buy what is called a buttermilk powder. Or you can just make your own at home, really good substitute. Take a half a cup, 120 milliliters of just milk, add a half of a tablespoon of either lemon juice or vinegar, stir that together, let it sit about 10 minutes at room temperature, and you have a good substitute for commercial buttermilk. Especially because, you know, you don't always have buttermilk in your home. That's why buttermilk powder I use a lot, because that's really, you can just keep it. So I'm going to add about 3/4 of a tablespoon of liquid red food coloring. That is what gives us that really red color to our cake. Now, if you can't find liquid red, you could use a gel or a paste. I'm not sure of the amount because I always use liquid red. But what we're looking for is your batter needs to be a bright red because it will fade a bit as it bakes. Now, be very careful with this food coloring. It will stain. So I got it on a little cloth there. So now what we're going to do is add our flour in 3 additions to our batter and alternate that with our buttermilk in 2. I will show you what I'm doing. So I just put about 1/3 of my flour, and I'm just going to beat that in. I'm going to add half of the buttermilk. Scrape that down. As you probably see, this is starting to turn really red. Kind of cool. So now I'm going to add a little more of my flour. Beat that in. And the rest of our buttermilk. Buttermilk's really thick. Make sure you get all that. And then I'll just put in the rest of our flour. Okay. I'm going to finish that off by hand. Put this in the sink. Now all my flour is mixed in, so I'm just going to take my spatula, get that all. So if you were, let's see how red that is, that's about what you're looking for. So now, this is what is kind of unique about, also besides the color, of a red velvet cake is what we're going to do here. We're going to mix some baking soda, a half a teaspoon, 2 grams, with a half a teaspoon of a distilled white vinegar. You could use any type of vinegar. And we're going to mix those together. It's going to kind of fizz up, and then we're going to quickly add it to our batter. And you know, that really lightens, again, it's going to lighten, just like the cake flour makes a soft and tender crumb. This baking soda with vinegar also helps to make a very light cake. So what we're going to do, it's going to fizz up here, so mix it together. As you can see, kind of fizz. And I'm going to add that in. And you want to do this kind of quickly, but thoroughly mix it in, just with your spatula, like so. And you don't want this to sit out too long, because that baking soda, once it gets moistened, it starts to work right away, so that's why we want to get it into the oven. So let's put it in the pan. Okay. And just take a back of a spoon, or I got an offset spatula. And now we're going to bake this. Everyone's oven is a little different. I find about 25 minutes. You know, maybe check it a little earlier than that. You don't want to overbake it. What's going to happen if you press it into the center, it'll kind of bounce back. The cake will start to pull away from the sides of the pan, and of course, when a toothpick is inserted into the center, it just comes out clean. Okay, our red velvet cake is done. As you can see, it's starting to pull away from the sides of the pan. If you press it, it kind of bounces back, and the toothpick inserted into the center just comes out clean. So now, put your the pan on a wire rack, let it cool about 10 minutes, and then take it out of the pan, and then let it cool completely. And when we come back, we will start our cake pops. So now we are going to make our cream cheese frosting. Again, I'm using my electric stand mixer, but you could use a hand mixer. First thing you will need is 2 tablespoons, which is 25 grams of butter. Have that at room temperature. And you will need 4 ounces, 115 grams of cream cheese. I'm using the full fat, and again, have that at room temperature. And I'm just going to beat those 2 together, get it nice and smooth. Good. Let's scrape that down. And then I'm going to add a half a teaspoon, which is 2 grams of pure vanilla extract for flavoring, along with 1 cup, 120 grams of confectioner sugar. You may know that as powdered or icing sugar. And I am going to sift that because it really tends to have lumps. We don't want that. We want nice smooth frosting here. So I'm just going to put that in, and then I'm going to beat the 2 together. Do that on low speed so you don't want that coming up in your face. And then I'm going to increase the speed to medium high and beat it for a minute or 2 just to get a little bit of air in there. Okay, so that's our frosting. Now you could, I like the classic red velvet cake cream cheese frosting. I mean, if you wanted to, you could use another type of frosting here. It's really up to you. That's the great thing about cake pops. Okay, so now I'm just going to put this in here. So now what we need to do is to get our cake into little crumbs. So I have a large bowl here, and I am just going to take my cake and just kind of mush it up with my fingers. You could use a food processor if you have that at home, but you know, your kids might like to help you do this. Kind of fun. Now, if you found that the outside of your cake, the edges are a little rough, you could cut those off. But really, we're mixing this all together. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so that looks good. Now, just as a little note, if you wanted to make the cake like a day or 2 ahead of time, if you want to break this up, you could do that. Okay, so there's our crumbs. So we have our frosting. Now what we're going to do is add enough frosting so we can form our mixture into little balls. So I'm not going, and it depends, like if you freshly make your cake, of course you probably will use less frosting than if you baked your cake a day or 2 ahead of time, because then it gets a little stale, so it would need more frosting. I'm going to shoot. This is a messy job, but I don't mind. So just kind of work, you really want to work that frosting in. I mean, you could do it in your food processor if you're going to put your cake in there to get the crumbs, but be very careful when you're pulsing. Just pulse it, because you don't want too much. So just work it in. Because if you don't have enough frosting, what you will find is once you chill your cake pops, they might tend to fall apart. And then too much, you get kind of a soggy mixture, which we don't want. So I'm just going to put a little more. So then what we're going to do is just roll these into, about 1 inch. I mean, you can make your cake pops any size you want. I find about 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters is a good size. Or if you want to, I'm actually going to weigh mine. I find it easier. That will be, you will need 1 ounce of your mixture, which is about 25 grams. And the good part about this is, once we make our cake balls, and we have to chill them, and that'll take 1 to 2 hours. But if you want, you can leave them in the fridge for a couple days if you want to do this whole thing in stages, or you can even freeze your cake balls unfrosted, and then for like a month, but make sure to defrost them overnight in the refrigerator. So like I said, I'm going to take about 25 gram, and then now if you found when you're rolling it kind of falls apart, what I do, sometimes that happens, I just take a little bit of frosting and then kind of work that in. But that looks pretty good. And then I just have a baking sheet lined with parchment. You could just do wax paper or even plastic wrap and just put that on there. So I'm just going to keep going here. Okay. Now make sure when you're rolling your balls that you really compact the crumbs, because what we don't want is later them to fall apart. So really kind of compact it and roll it into a tight ball. So there we have them. Now we need to chill these before we dip them into our candy melts. So I just cover my pan and put in the fridge, an hour, 2 hours. Like I said, you could do it a couple days, or you can freeze them. Now, there's 2 ways to do this. I actually like to put my sticks into my cake balls now. A lot of people, and you can do this, they prefer to chill these and then use your candy melts to kind of do it as a glue. I actually like to kind of like a production line, and then I find it easier, and then I just have to dip them, and the sticks are already in. So you will need like these lollipop sticks. You can buy them online, or you can buy them in cake decorating stores or like craft stores. And I'm using actually a really long one. This is 6 inches, which is about 15 centimeters. You could use a 4-inch as well, 10 centimeters. This is all I could find, so this is what we're using. And so I'm just taking that, and then I'm just going to insert it, not all the way through, of course, just about halfway in, like so. And then I just lay them down. And then once I do all that, then I'll cover the sheet and put them into the refrigerator to chill. And when we come back, we will dip our cake pops. So I've chilled the cake balls overnight so they're nice and cold. So now they are ready to be dipped. Now you can use just melted white chocolate to dip your the cake balls or pops in, but my personal preference is to use these white chocolate candy melts, also called candy wafers, candy coating. And the reason I like to use these is because it dries to this nice hard, crisp outer shell, which makes a nice contrast to the soft cake inside. Now, these candy melts, you can find them at cake decorating stores or craft stores or online. And like I said, if you don't want to use this, you could just use melted white chocolate. Now, you will need approximately, depending on how thick you like your coating, between 1 pound and 1.5 pounds of your candy melts, which is 450 to about 675 grams. But I like to melt about 1/2 pound, 225 grams at a time. I find that's like a nice amount to work with at a time. So what you will need is I have a saucepan of simmering water, and you want to put your candy melts in a heat-proof bowl. The other alternative, you could melt them in the microwave. If you do that, put it, of course, in a microwavable bowl, and be very careful. Just do it at maybe at the beginning, a 20-second amount of heat, and then take it out, really give it a good stir, and then short, maybe 10, 15-minute blasts after that, and really stir it. You don't want to overheat it. So, but for convenience, so you can see what I'm doing easily, I'm going to use the saucepan. So just put it over simmering, barely simmering heat. We don't want this to heat up too much, and I'm just going to let it melt. Okay, so they're almost melted. As I said, you want to make sure your heat is quite low, so we don't want this to overheat. So that looks good. Take it off the heat, plug that, and give it a good stir. Now at this point, it's pretty thick. So what I'm going to do, and every brand may be a little different, is I'm going to add just a little bit. Now you can add a little bit of shortening, or you could add a little bit of these, what is called Paramount crystals. And you can usually buy those where you buy, you know, your candy melts. And just to thin this out just a little, it's pretty, see, as you can see, it's really thick, and that's going to be like too thick of a coating on our cake pops. So I'm just going to add, you know, maybe like, you want to start like a small amount, because, you know, it's hard to take away. You can't take away, but you can add more. And if you put too much, then you'll have to melt some more candy melts, and then you kind of get into this thing. So I like to start with a little bit and see where we're going. Then, like I said, I can always add a little more. If it doesn't melt completely, you could always put it back over your heat just a bit. And remember too, if it's a little thin, you can always let this cool down a bit, because the candy melts do harden. So as it cools down, it will thicken. So that's your other option if you find it's a little too thin. So that's almost about right. You want it, yeah, I think that's about right. So I'm just going to let this cool down just a touch, and then I'll get my cake pops out of the fridge and we will finish up. So now I did transfer my candy melts into a small deep bowl, makes it easier to dip. And then there's my cake pops. Now if you found, because when you formed them they were a little bumpy, now because they're really cold you could just kind of even it out. And then I have some sprinkles, and then you will need a piece of styrofoam just so I can stick it in there so they dry upright. You know, you may have a piece around the house from packing, or again you can buy styrofoam like that at cake decorating stores or craft stores. So now I take my cake pop, nice and cold, and I just dip it straight down, and you want to make sure the whole thing is coated evenly. And then you can kind of tap it or just move it around so any excess drips off. If you found you kind of do a test one and it's too thick, or it starts to run down, then of course you could thin it out or just let it sit a bit and thicken up. So that's good. And then at this point, if you want, that looks pretty good, you could put some sprinkles on there, kind of make it pretty. And all over my hands as well. And that looks good. And then just put it in your styrofoam. Hopefully I gotta kind of get all the air. That's why it's good to tap. Do what I say, not what I do, as they say. Okay, there we go. Like I said, if you have any excess rundown, you can just use your finger and get that, which I will have to do. Okay, oh, that looks pretty good. So, and then you just carry on and do that. Like I said, it takes a few minutes to dry, and it dries to a really nice crisp outside coating. So we will, now I did some earlier, and we will try that one because it's, I don't know whether you can hear that, but it's kind of crisp and hard. So I'm just going to take, and I'll just cut off a piece. As you can see, it's And there, you can see, well, you have the nice cake inside in the white. Now you can buy candy melts in all different colors, so if you want a green, you could do green or red. But I kind of like the white chocolate. Nice and crisp, and then you got the soft cake inside, red velvet cake, very good, very cute. Perfect to give as gifts or have at your next party. So try them. And until next time, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com.